By the spring of 1944, Britain's southern coast had become a dense collection of military camps and staging areas. Over 1.5 million soldiers and thousands of warships now crowded the shoreline, waiting for the order to cross. General Dwight D. Eisenhower and his commanders drew up a strategy to hit the Normandy coast across a 50-mile front. The objective was to pour troops onto the beaches, absorb the inevitable counterattacks, and rapidly secure logistical hubs like Caen and Cherbourg. This map illustrates how the Allies protected that advancing armada. To trick the German military, they spent months feeding them fake intelligence, creating an entire phantom army meant to convince the enemy that the real invasion was headed straight for the Pas-de-Calais. Waiting across the channel was Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. His strategy was brutal and straightforward. Fortify the coast with millions of mines and concrete bunkers, the so-called Atlantic Wall, and slaughter the invaders before they could ever get off the sand. On the map boards at Allied headquarters, Operation Overlord looked like a logistical masterpiece, but a plan that relies entirely on thousands of vulnerable human beings executing it under heavy artillery fire is bound to encounter friction. There is an immense gap between generals pushing wooden blocks across a map and the actual troops waiting on the tarmac to drop into total darkness. Hours before takeoff, troops received a printed letter from Eisenhower himself. The text offered a stark warning of the savage, battle-hardened enemy ahead. One man reading that terrifying directive was Major James Robert Morgan, second in command of the British 12th Light Anti-Aircraft Regiment. Morgan took the Supreme Commander's historic order, flipped it over, and wrote a casual note to his wife. He joked that he looked like Father Christmas waddling around in his heavy gear, promised he'd be home soon, and asked her to save him some of the tomatoes. This juxtaposition defines the invasion. While High Command prepared for a massive campaign, the men tasked with fighting were busy writing home about their gardens. The friction started immediately. Over the Cotton Peninsula, transport planes hit a thick, unexpected cloud bank that obscured the drop zones. Elite Pathfinder units were sent ahead to mark the landing areas with specialized radar transponders, known as Eurekas. But many of those beacons failed to work, leaving the pilots entirely blind. Men like 29-year-old Sergeant Floyd Corrington jumped into the pitch black, landing miles away from their designated targets. His unit hopelessly scattered in the dark, and Corrington would be killed in action before the day was out. When the high-tech navigation systems failed, soldiers were isolated. They had to piece together improvised, mixed-unit squads in the dark and try to execute their mission anyway. As dawn broke, the plan continued to disintegrate. A pre-invasion naval and aerial bombardment was supposed to obliterate the German concrete strongpoints. Instead, most of the bombers missed their targets entirely. At Omaha Beach, the assault relied heavily on duplex drive, or DD, tanks, armor modified with canvas screens designed to float and swim to shore. The rough seas swamped them immediately. 27 out of 32 tanks assigned to the 741st Tank Battalion sank miles from the coast. Without armored fire support, heavily laden infantry were forced to disembark onto submerged sandbars and wade through neck-high water, completely exposed to the surviving German bunkers. The defenders were positioned high on the bluffs, overlooking the narrow gullies the Americans had to use to exit the beach. They were armed with the MG-42, a belt-fed general-purpose machine gun capable of laying down a horrifying volume of fire. The suppressive power of that weapon was devastating. A single German gunner claimed to have inflicted over 1,000 casualties on the advancing troops. The total collapse of Allied artillery and armor support meant the infantry had to push through the bloodiest sectors, relying entirely on raw human endurance. To the east, at Pegasus Bridge, lightly armed British airborne troops were facing their own desperate situation. Heavy German armored counterattacks were bearing down on them, threatening total annihilation. The paratroopers' best defense was the Piat, a shoulder-fired spigot mortar that launched a high-explosive charge. It was notoriously difficult to use, requiring the operator to get dangerously close to an enemy tank and fire on a severe arcing trajectory. Just as the commanding officer prepared to send men in with hand grenades, Sergeant Wagger Thornton managed to score a direct, decisive hit on the lead tank. The sudden explosion tricked the Germans into thinking heavy anti-tank artillery was in play, forcing them to rethink and halt their advance. A crucial foothold that could have been lost on a strategic scale was secured because a single soldier managed to pull off a desperate shot with a highly flawed weapon. While Allied soldiers were adapting on the ground, the German high command was entirely paralyzed. Rommel was away visiting his family, and Adolf Hitler slept through the initial morning assault. As this map illustrates, Hitler's delay in releasing his armored reserves gave the Allies a crucial window. We can see the 5 distinct, isolated landing zones finally expanding and merging into a single, continuous front across Normandy. With the beachhead secured, the Allies poured equipment onto the French coast. They deployed overwhelming mobile artillery, like the 25-pounder Sexton self-propelled gun, which easily crushed the disorganized German counterattacks when they finally arrived. The German insistence on centralized, top-down control locked their military in place. Meanwhile, the Allied troops' ability to adapt to terrifying conditions on the ground secured the foothold. The specialized tools, high-altitude bombardments, and naval barrages failed almost as soon as the first troops hit the water. Victory in this 5-beach assault rested on the resilience of men like Major Robert Morgan, Sergeant Floyd Corrington, and Sergeant Wagger Thornton. D-Day triggered the beginning of the end for the Nazi regime because thousands of individual soldiers bridged the massive gap between grand military strategy and the brutal reality of the beach.